Welcome to Leadership Bites with myself, your host, Guy Bloom. This is a leadership podcast where I have conversations with colleagues, I chat with guests, and sometimes there'll be just me talking. You can connect with me at livingbrave.com, and when you enjoy the episode, subscribe and please tell everyone. Sophie, it is absolutely fantastic to have you on this episode of Leadership Bites. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Guy. I'm just delighted to be here.
Well, I'm really looking forward to the conversation we're going to have. We've been chatting before we got started, so there's quite a lot of things I'd like to cover. I know who you are. I always say this when I start the episode, but there will be people that don't. So please just do that. You're at a barbecue and somebody says, "What do you do?" Give us a sense of who you are and what you do.
It's too cold to be at a barbecue right now. But anyway, so I am actually a Brit, but I live in New York. I have been for a while, and I've lived all around the world, which is very relevant in terms of what I do. But I'm a work futurist and an author and the founder and workforce innovation specialist at Flexel Network, which is a future of work consultancy. So I do a lot of speaking, writing, and workshops and consulting around the future of work and adapting to the future of work. But I do have my second book, which came out earlier this year, which is called Empathy Works, the Key to Competitive Advantage in the New Era of Work.
Empathy is something I'd like to pick up on. It's quite easy to agree with certain things. You know, they're great words and they make a lot of sense to people, but they come on reflection. They come loaded with the possibility to do good and potentially to do harm depending on what's happening. So let's just think about the book just for a moment before I get into a couple of questions. When you're going to write a book about such a topic as empathy, what was the catalyst for that for you? What was that sort of sense of, do you know what, I think I've got something that will add value to the conversation?
Well, empathy was not something that had occurred sort of naturally to me, or I sort of said, yes, empathy, I must bring more empathy into the world. It was much more, I'd been in the workplace flexibility space, so to speak, since 2011, came across this overarching sort of umbrella term called the future of work in 2015. And I was like, ooh, that's bigger and gnarly, and it has so many different problems associated with, transitioning to that. And I was speaking a lot about leadership and intergenerational communication challenges and miscommunications, and also so those sort of three pillars. And the third pillar was the decentralized workforce. And particularly when it came to generations, so many people were complaining about those. At the time, it was those darn millennials. And so finally I said, okay, fine, what's going on? There have so many complaints and challenges with that. So I did read tons of research and put myself in their shoes. And so it was literally putting myself in their shoes. I was like, oh, okay, now I get it. And it was actually empathy then became the solution for also the understanding of new types of leadership, putting yourself in your team members' shoes. And that's the way to deal with it. And then when I was talking about the decentralized workforce, and this was back in 2017, 2018, then really kind of like, what's it like if you're sitting on the other end of that Zoom call or telephone call? How does that person feel? So it came out of that. So it wasn't actually elevated to be the headliner for sort of speeches for a lot of my work until about in early 2019. And then, of course, the pandemic really raised it, and it sort of became a kind of, I guess, a buzzword of sorts. And so at that time, because I had so much understanding and had been speaking so much about and working so much with empathy and trying to help people understand, because for me it's really about human understanding, that's when I thought, okay, I think I actually need to put into a book so people can understand what it means and how to do it. It's all about empathy habits and really being able to put it into practice.
Now, this might be the $64 million question, because if we say empathy and sympathy, and there's lots of words that can float around, is there anything that would help somebody in a leadership role navigate what that word, in some respects, and I be careful with this, but the true meaning of the word? There might be a dictionary definition, but is there for you when somebody might say, listen, that word empathy, is it about sensitivity? Is a duty of care enough? Just the fact that you pay attention to others? Or, well, I have to care about people that I don't even know or like? Or help somebody that might be a little bit wary of the word? have a better relationship with it?
Yes, it does tend to have a lot of baggage. So for me, I define it as the ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and effectively feel what they're feeling, which means you have to understand the world through their eyes, and then connect with their experience, connect with what they're going through. Now, there are debates about where compassion and empathy, where is the line between one and the other. In the end, I push off that debate, and I'm like, we just need more of both of them. So, but for me, I define it in sort of three different phases: sort of think, putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and seeing the world from their eyes; act, which is cognitive empathy. Then there's affective empathy, which is connecting with that feeling, recognizing what the feeling really is, and then connecting with it. And then actually empathetic action, which is doing something about it. Now, you're absolutely right. It doesn't have to be, which you sort of said, alluded to earlier. It doesn't have to be good. You can have some very empathetic, very manipulative people. But what I am talking about is people using empathy to have better conversations, better interactions, have successful collaboration sessions, all those type of things. So I do look at it as in using it for positive ends.
Some people have high observational capabilities in the leadership space. They're very good at knowing what's going on for people. And that just may be down to just a high level of observational inherent capability, or they've learned how to do it. So and I was just talking to somebody, literally, I'm going to say the word recently, so I don't let them know I'm talking about them. But one of the things I said was, I notice you noticing. I see you seeing. However, there's a difference between you seeing and you doing something with it that isn't to your own advantage. Is that what empathy might be, which is you see it, you recognise it, whether or not you train for it or you're already good at it, but then it's no good you doing nothing. It's no good you using it to your own ends. It's as a contribution to the other person. Is that part of this? I've seen it and I'm going to do something. And when I say benefits you, it might be tough feedback. It might be putting my metaphorical arm around you. It's not that we're in a kibbutz here. I'm hearing from you.
Look, the way I look at these things, if you can certainly use that kind of additional human understanding that empathy gives you by connecting with somebody's experience, you can use it to your advantage, your sole advantage. But that is a short-term view. And when I'm looking at and talking about empathy, it really is, we're playing the long game. And the long game means that we're developing relationships that are trust-based and are going to be beneficial in a business environment. And that can be you're talking to a customer or potential customer and being able to convert them because you actually understand them better. It could be somebody along your supply chain because everything's changing. We need to sort of diversify. We need to be strategically aligned with our supply chain. So you need to have better and stronger relationships and understand each other better there. And with your employees, because you want to retain them or you want to attract them and convert them. In all of these, you're playing the long game. And so if you're going to use it to your sole advantage, that's not going to have a long-term positive impact. So that's the way I sort of frame how you use that information and understanding and to act. If you want to use it in the short term and that's just to your sole advantage, I wouldn't advise it.
I think there's a craft to this. Tell me what you think about this, which is and I maybe even I've done it myself in some respects, having empathy for somebody, you've got to be careful that it doesn't turn into, if somebody's having a bad experience or whatever it is, an element of pity. And I see that where people describe themselves as being highly empathetic, but what they then seem to do is turn the other person into a victim by almost rescuing them. I see your pain and I see what's going on. And actually, they're not really trying to build them up. What they're almost doing is enabling them. They've had the observation, but I think they call it empathy. But for some people, what you've really done is seen something, you're rescuing them, which actually isn't enabling them to grow or receive feedback. They describe themselves as, I'm very empathetic. But what they love is the drama and they love coming to the rescue. You're an enabler in a really bad way. So I don't know if you have got empathy. You're good at spotting it, but I don't know if that's the same thing.
Well, I think, and there's also, you have a good number of people, who are deeply empathetic, who might call themselves empaths. And for them, they really, truly absorb the other person's pain or sadness or joy. And they find it very difficult to actually have a boundary between sort of your troubled emotions or state and mine. And so they actually need to very, very deliberately create boundaries. So yes, I mean, when I look at when you're delving into the interpersonal skills and particularly things to do with emotion, it is important to understand where the boundaries are. And I look at it in terms of balance of needs. And if you're very empathetic, you can get bulldozed because you're trying to do what it is that you want. I don't care about my needs anymore. So in the book, there's a sort of a subtitle which is about the balance of needs and sort of saying in a conversation, to have a productive conversation, it's about connecting and understanding your interest, your contributions, bringing you allowing you to really bring your ideas, and I hear them when we debate them. But also, you doing the same to me, because this is one of the sort of the basis of human understanding, reciprocity, and collaboration, and it is reciprocal. So, in order to have a trust-based, productive relationship, it needs to go both ways.
So tell me what you think about this, because I deal with a lot of executives and a lot of senior people. And what I notice is that there are 2 or 3 different types of personalities. What you described there, I think, is spot on. People that have the genuine human reaction, and you can see that they've seen it and felt it, and they've almost ingested what's going on for the other person, and they'll bring it into the moment. Then you've got people who've learned not to. As in, I see what's going on for you, but I'm definitely not going to go there because it's going to mean an increased workload for me, or I'm going to have to enter into your reality, which I just don't want to, or, because I've been doing this, I've ridden this horse before, and if I show care, I'm going to get sucked into your drama. And then you've got those that, for whatever reasons, be it upbringing or whatever it is, they just don't have that emotional chip, almost. I kind of see this spectrum. Tell me what you think about this. For somebody that has an inherent empathy from the life they've led, or their inherent characteristics, their DNA, I'm hearing you say something there, which is, just because you've got it doesn't mean that you might not have to set boundaries. That volume control for you may be its own problem. For others who you see it but you're not doing anything with it, then they've got to find the stepping stone back to what are you doing with that observation, and how's it being of service. I'm particularly sometimes interested in the ones that don't have that empathetic emotional response, but I do notice that they still see it. And I'm wondering if it's okay. This is rhetorical because I think it is, but I want you to go, no, it isn't, Guy, or yes, I agree with you. I don't mind which, right? I think it's okay that if you don't have it as an inherent trait, that you can still intellectualize that it's important for others and demonstrate the behaviors of empathy, because you recognize that you need to contribute and that other people need it, even though you're not necessarily having it as what would be described as a characteristically empathic reaction. How does that sit with you? Is that gobbledygook, or does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. And in fact, I think it was the beginning of 2019, I gave a speech about headlining on empathy to 400 developers. And one guy, in terms of being able, supporting a high performance team, interaction and collaboration, things like that. And one guy came up to him at the end, and he was sort of freaking out. It was like, but I've got 10 direct reports. I can't possibly, it'd be so much emotion if I have to connect with them, all of them. And I was like, you don't have to. You really don't. And you don't have to do it all the time. But so and I advised him, you can certainly, and certainly to begin with, be just asking the questions. How are you doing? How's your family or your dog, or finding out that they have a dog, and all those type of things. So you don't have to be doing the emotional connection, just that cognitive empathy, which is understanding the world from their perspective and really showing them that you value what they have to say and what their contributions are, and listening. I mean, listening is the most important core component of empathy, which basically says to you, I value what you're saying. But what then builds from that is, if we're going to have a really strong trust-based empathetic relationship, which is going to help us work effectively together, having some sort of leaning into that emotional connection will be helpful over time. Some of the ways to do that, because everybody, it's a basic human instinct, but we just haven't necessarily been using it in our professional lives. We have in our personal lives. But you can have that emotional connection about other things. Let's just say you and I support the same football team, or we love dogs. So we have some common ground. We do have an emotional connection, and that can help us at least cement that piece of it, so that we have a means, let's just say, if we're in a very difficult conversation or there's some conflict going on, that there is more common ground where it's not just intellectual. Because I do think some of those, that human, that sort of more emotional connection does help sort of build the fabric of a strong relationship that is more productive over time.
So there's a couple of things going on here then. There is that when you're in longer term relationships in the workplace, where I work with you and I might know you for, well, it could be decades, but it could be whatever it is, being seen to take an interest, even regardless of you actually being interested. But actually, if you are, and if you're able to do it genuinely, it's going to be a heck of a lot easier for you as the person doing it. And I just noticed that some people, it's quite difficult for them when they have these incredibly tight timelines and the pressures of their work. This concept of having empathy, I think, can sometimes be more digestible for them if they see it as actually a requirement of the role, as almost a vehicle for them getting the things that they want. You're creating connections that allow you to have a bridge for the other person to meet you in the midpoint, where actually there's a little more sense of you're human, you've taken an interest in me, almost by putting deposits into that proverbial emotional bank account. When the empathy is required, or you recognise it's required, this is not the first time you've ever shown an interest in me, therefore this doesn't worry me, it doesn't maybe look contrived, because there's a familiarity in us. We may not have had this level of conversation before, but actually it's not a surprise space. So I think that's what I've heard. Those connections help build the bridges that become more stable to take the bigger conversations.
So on two levels, yes, absolutely. One, I would say that generally now in particular, but also obviously in more complex, difficult situations, needing more, critical thinking and problem solving and intense collaboration, then you need everybody, every single person on your team very much engaged. And the way to engage them was really to understand them and be able to align them with their skills and strengths and those type of things. And as a leader, that's really, really important to be able to understand each individual team member very well. Secondly, from a scientific point of view, oxytocin is the chemical that's released in your brain, which is to do with trust and empathy. And the challenge is that, in fact, in stressful situations, that is an oxytocin inhibitor. So if you and I were in a very stressful situation, if we didn't already have that better relationship, we would actually have a much worse relationship and therefore be in a sort of much more, our ability to work together effectively to solve a problem will be reduced because of the oxytocin suppressant of that stress. So if we have already built up that relationship and that connection, and we have common ground, we sort of, we share history, we share some memories that make us sort of comfortable, that we sort of have a good understanding of each other, that is absolutely going to help us be able to resolve or deal with or work together and collaborate effectively to come up with a solution.
This brings us into the workplace. Maybe every generation says this, and it's probably true, but it's an evolving workplace. It has its complexities. And we've got this really wide demographic of people. We've got the millennials, the Gen Zs, etc. Talk to me about empathy in the workplace. Why is it particularly important for culture leaders getting work done in the current context that we're all operating in now?
Yeah, the circumstances are much more challenging than we have dealt with in the past. And we have believed in the past, really, that if you pay someone, to show up, it's been much more transactional. I pay you, you'll show up, you'll do your work. But you could actually say that person who shows up has not actually been engaged, which is part of that sort of quiet quitting understanding that people aren't really putting all that effort in. Well, we haven't really tried to engage them so much. We haven't, and now there is a couple of decades of really good research showing what actually will help people engage and help leaders give their employees different experiences, understanding that you, Guy, are a different person, and that how I'm going to motivate and incentivize and oversee you is going to be different than your teammates. So empathy, when we're dealing with, now that the future of work is here, technology which is the sort of major driver of the future of work, which means that it's faster, it's much more networked, it's much less linear work, it's much more teamwork. We're having to work much more closely together across disciplines, working on minimal viable products and testing things and rolling that into the marketplace because technology is causing customer behaviors to change so much. And we have that sort of feedback loop, which is much tighter, and we're having to listen to customers, which we never had to do in the same way as 20 years ago. All of that has raised the bar in terms of what our talent, our team members need to do and how they need to be producing. And we need to be giving them more responsibility, close to the front line. All of these are really challenging managers and leaders at every level of the organization. And so the more that I can connect and understand each of my team members, the more that I can gauge, the more I can sort of get more out of them. And we can produce better results and it be easier, less sort of, it's more frictionless if we can have a culture that not only are we practicing empathy on a skill level, but we have a culture that gives us the foundation to have better relationships, to have that trust space, to be able to have that psychological safety so that we are able to all, bring our best selves, and contribute fully and feel free to speak up. So all of these elements that are empathy at a sort of cultural value level, and then a mindset that we're bringing in to be inclusive, because empathy and inclusion are actually very closely related. And then practicing empathy on a habits basis. So there are lots of ways very practically that I look at empathy in terms of listening, asking open questions, so that to make that easier. But to have that foundation, that cultural foundation, is really critical because it all really is going to start from there. And particularly when you're working across multiple locations, because that's what helps connect us and stay feeling part of a community that we can feel comfortable within and be less distracted by all the noise and challenges and changes that are going on all around us.
Some people have seen empathy, or they have a sense that it's being weaponized. If we show empathy and we give people the ability to hold us to account for certain behaviours, that's fine. But if we're not careful, I think some people believe the tail will wag the dog. We will be held to a level of behaviour that then becomes unproductive and actually gets in the way, because it's all about how you feel. It's all about what's going on for you in the moment. So I think there are some people that fear, probably a small portion of people, as opposed to the majority who would just like some empathy and to be treated with some respect and to have some really honest adult conversations. But they fear that amount of people that can start to talk about, I'm being bullied. Well, are you being bullied or are we being forthright? I think for some people, they fear that counterbalance.
The ones that typically are bullied or overridden are the ones who are deeply empathetic. Those are the empaths. And I have several friends who are very, very empathetic. They're not the ones who fear that. The ones who use that as an excuse, those are the ones who actually don't want to have to do it. Now, maybe they find it hard, like the gentleman who came up to me, and I'm empathetic with them because, sometimes it can be hard particularly if you haven't practiced it in the workplace. And you do typically practice it with your friends. You just aren't necessarily used to do it in the workplace because it has been much more transactional in the past. And some people take jobs where they don't have to deal with lots of people because they find it uncomfortable. And that's why if I look at it at habits, you, as you said, the observing and acting based on the observing without having to connect emotionally, you can do it like that and still have a great amount of that effect. I think one of the things, it's interesting if you're talking to people in the military, because I think one of the things is it's easier to just do the command and control thing, right? I just tell you what to do. I don't have to connect with you. I don't have to listen to your BS or whatever it is that I don't have to value you and show the value, and that's more effort for me, and I don't have time to do that and all the rest of it. That's for me where it becomes an excuse. And my response to that, first of all, I was at a conference speaking to mostly investors about empathetic leadership. And a gentleman came up to me afterwards and he said, "Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. When I was a Marine for 6 years, our squadron leader couldn't possibly had led the group of us without being highly empathetic." And I was like, that was not where I expected where you were going. He said, if you're going to understand how people are, how they're going to act and react and perform in high levels of stress, you need to be deeply empathetic to really understand who they are, how, what their emotional levels are, what they respond to, and things like that. Just talked to somebody else who actually went to Sandhurst, and he had the same thing, that empathy is very much, as a leader in high-performing teams in the military, it is absolutely incredibly important to really understand your team members. That is not, I think, in the business world, how we think about sort of militaristic command and control leadership. But it is actually a very important thread which we don't talk about as much, or maybe it wasn't, that piece of it didn't transition so much into the workplace. So I do see that as a fundamental thread of effective leadership, is that understanding and trying to make as much of a connection as possible, whether it is mostly cognitive but also emotional. And I think the more you understand somebody, the more the emotion will come through. Anyway, it doesn't have to be huge, kind of like, yes, I'm feeling it with you. It can be relative to who you are.
I do experience some people that believe that there are people in their organisations who will utilise kindness and turn it. These are the people that are looking to opt out. They're looking to cause problems, and I think, and almost use it back against them.
Right, but going back to the balance of needs, it doesn't mean that I am. If I'm being empathetic, it doesn't mean that I'm listening to you, hearing your point of view, and then going only with your point of view. That's not the point. The point is for me to understand your point of view and listen to you, and also help you understand that I value your opinion, I value your contributions, I respect you as a person. And so I'm making sure that you feel included and you're part of a meaningful part of the whole collaboration, or just the conversation if it's just two of us. It doesn't mean that you get 100% of the opinion, that only your idea is heard, and mine isn't relevant at all. So it is having had that connection, with that understanding, what do you do with it? And then that is up to you to actually create that balance, create the boundaries, and to be effective. And as a leader, that is very much, in a leadership role, that's absolutely what you need to do. So, and that also does mean it can include, for sure, if there's a whole group of people that you don't necessarily speak as a leader, but you have everybody else's opinion, and then you may sort of, contribute yours at the very end. So I think there are very different ways that we are leading now, but it doesn't mean that anybody else's opinion, or you get railroaded, or there isn't a need to create appropriate balance. It's that balance is shifted, and how that equilibrium is reached is very different. With command and control, it was centralized decision making, which isn't fast enough now. It's people need to have the responsibility needs to be shared out much more and pushed down and out across organizations. So all of that does shift, and to get that balance and the different equilibria right is going to take some time, and it's not, nobody's going to be getting it right all the time. I agree. But just like, the kind of like, well, we shouldn't have hybrid working, we shouldn't have people working from home because some people, just don't do anything. Well, when they're in the office, those people don't do anything either. It's not where they are, it's who they are and how they work, and helping them have a manager who's actually going to oversee them in the right way, and making sure they stay connected and trying to engage them. So I think, Yes, but that's your job as a leader.
That's the bit I like. That's the bit I wanted to hear you say, really, which is, yeah, they may exist. That may be true. There are people that will, maybe 1, 10, 5, it doesn't matter. Are people that will utilise any level of kindness or the gift that you give them against them. But that's kind of your job. It's like having kids. They're lovely, but they can also be buggers. And when they're buggers, it's your job to go, it's not that I don't love you, but we need to have a chat.
Yes.
Right?
And kids are actually really good at helping because, I learned early on that just because I told you so, it really doesn't work very well, ultimately.
Oh, hold on. I need to write that down. Are you sure?
And even if they don't really understand what the reason is, if they understand that you're actually trying to give a reason, then they're kind of like, oh, okay. But, there comes a balance at a certain point. You're like, okay, I've given you the reason, and now...
And this brings me into this idea of social contracts. I'm 53. My father's social contract, I think, was when he started work in his 20s was turn up, work hard. Your chances are you won't ever get dismissed. You've got a job for life. Just put your head down, do as you're told, be relatively obedient. And you know what? You could probably stay here until you retire. What is that social contract now?
It's completely broken. I mean, so... In the 50s and into the 60s, the organization looked after you. It was that very patriarchal. You put in long, often crappy hours at the beginning with that understanding and agreement that you had job security, you could maybe have a job for 30, 40 years, and you would get to not only retire, but there would be a pension. So whatever you'd managed, you'd sort of gone up very incrementally up many, many, many layers of hierarchy, and then you would get to retire and sort of enjoy those golden years. That completely doesn't exist anymore. So there is neither a linear, continuous, compounding career, the way I sort of frame it. You have many fewer layers of hierarchy because companies have to be more nimble, so they've had to sort of flatten. And which is good because then people sort of, the senior leaders and the, new entrants in the labour market are much closer together, which I think is beneficial. But careers progress in non-linear ways. They go horizontally, they go diagonally. So that's more complicated. Gen Z's millennials for years have known that their pensions are underwater. And if you ask a Gen Z or millennial, they know, and they are generally a little bit resentful of the fact that they, one, know that they won't be able to retire, and two, that they know they're going to have no pension. And that changes everything in terms of their feeling of me versus you. You baby boomer or older Gen X, what you feel about work and how you feel about work. And if you want me to work those really, really long hours, I know I'm not going to be staying at your organization because I know you have no loyalty to me. You talk about my loyalty to you. You have no loyalty to me, and I'm not going to be working here. So why would you, for more than 2, 3, maybe 5 years? And so why would I put in all those long hours when, what am I getting from you in return?
So I do notice that some people have a reaction to the Gen Z millennials as almost being, they just want so much, they're just so wrapped up in their own needs. But I wonder if that's true. I wonder if it's, no, have some empathy. They've grown up differently. Their boundaries are different. Their vistas are wider. They're not going to be held by the boundaries that possibly held us. And that would be the first of a starting point, I think, for empathy, which is actually just recognise that they were born into a different place, a different space, and they just don't have the same lens on the world that you do.
Right, absolutely. That's exactly it. And the world that they're coming into, I mean, I get a lot of pushback and, entitlement and many other words. And, the way I explain it to start with is really, Gen Zs didn't go off into a corner of TikTok and plot to disrupt the workplace. That's not how it happened. What they're doing is really coming into the workplace, which they have no sense of and understanding of, and they're reacting to it, the reality of what is now. The future of work arrived, basically accelerated by the pandemic in 2020. And they're reacting, responding, kind of going, okay, this is how to be successful. It was only 7 years ago that millennials were doing the same thing, and we were pushing it. And it was a lot to do with technology. It's like, well, if we have this very powerful mobile computer that I can wander around with and do my work wherever I am, why wouldn't I? And if I can actually try and understand for the first time ever how I work best, why wouldn't I do that? And so there are lots and lots of things which have evolved because of technology and responding to that in a very natural and organic way. On top of exactly what you're saying in terms of if I grow up and I have incredible access to information. Information used to equal power, right? Only the people at the very top of the pointy triangle had all the information and they had all the power. Now the triangle is much flatter because we all have so much access to information and a much greater view of the world and what the opportunities are and the ability to, well, how can I apply my skills in different ways? And so I can maybe go into that industry or do this. And if I have a much more expansive way of viewing the world, I can think about, attacking jobs which have never existed before, like a drone pilot or a cybersecurity expert or a genetic consultant. I mean, these jobs didn't exist before. So when I'm sort of looking at the world in that way, I automatically have a very different perspective from a much, much smaller worldview than we had before. And yes, you do in a situation where the last data I saw was that 60% of Gen Zs think that people aren't to be trusted. Now that's a huge problem. Whether it's disinformation or people being fired, they said I had a job here and now they turn around and firing me. There are so many different reasons, and a lot of the younger generations are looking at older ones and saying, okay, so to do with the planet, we should be doing something more about it. If we really believe that the planet is in a bad shape, why aren't we doing more about it? Because this is certainly our planet. And so that there are that's for me one of the fundamental areas where there's a lack of credibility for boomers and Gen X by the younger generations because of the state the planet is. They believe this planet is in, and so I think there's a lot of trust that needs to be built up. And we can all be working very effectively together coming up with solutions.
So for me then, there's almost a personal empathy, which is just what's going on for the human being in maybe their daily life or whatever it is. But then there's a recognition that there are some people who are operating with a level of anxiety or concern about the planet, about the world, about society. It's not that anybody really fundamentally opts out of being in society. However, there are generations that probably don't walk around thinking about it or framing it in the same way that some of the youngsters do, because it's much more at the forefront of their thinking.
Right. And they've got many more decades ahead.
Yeah, and so it feels as if there's almost two things going on for that younger generation, which is may have not been so present in other generations, which is they're holding the truth of looking at not just the situation they're in, but the situation that the company is, the context of the company's operations, how they actually behave. And that causes them an anxiety or a concern.
Right.
To a level that intellectually may have been there in the past, but may not have been so present as something that they were carrying around with them.
And together with that, on that less than solid foundation is the sense of it's not even about job security, it's now about income security. So I think it's 59 and 61% respectively of millennials and Gen Zs have a side hustle. A lot of those side hustles are simply to try and have a financial cushion so they don't just have one income stream. And so we have many more people who are becoming independent contractors or having part-time work or having more than one side hustle. And one, it may be because I want to transition to another area or a different type of job or whatever it might be. But a lot of it is to do with financial or income security. And that's a huge underpinning of a lot of anxiety, mental stress. And so that is something really to be thinking about when it's like, well, why would they have the side hustles? They're not concentrating on the main job. It's like, well, if you aren't giving them any kind of job security, they're distracted by that a lot.
I came across that phrase side hustle a few years ago. I was brought up if you had something else that was a hobby, you liked fishing or something, right, fine, crack on. But if you had a separate revenue stream, then that would take some explaining potentially. And it would need to be understood that it wasn't an interference. However, what I do recognise is that I am seeing, and I, have had that in the past where I've sort of wanted to do other things because it could be from creativity. It could be my need for innovation. It could be just that I want to strike out and do other things. But actually there is something about people might be doing it to earn money because financially now the world is in a very different place. That's definitely true. But also there's just a need for I'm more than just the job. And if I'm going to grow and evolve, I can be more valuable here if I'm more confident, more capable, more knowledgeable because I'm developing. Yeah, I might leave one day. It might be a stepping stone to something else. That's okay. But actually, it's about, are we committed to the whole person evolving? Or actually, do we just want to keep you isolated and very linear? Because actually, we don't really want you to grow out of here.
Yes. And two things to that. One is, to keep myself competitive, I need to keep growing my skills. We all know that, right? Everybody needs to be growing their skills because skills evolution is key in terms of being able to do my job, because the way that any job that I'm doing is going to keep changing and moving with new technologies. And the half-life of a skill, which is the amount of time it takes for a skill to become half as valuable, has gone from 10 years now to 5 years, and technical skills probably about half that. And so that's really important for me to keep sort of upskilling. Now, you either help me as my employer, but if I'm doing that, and sort of doing something entrepreneurial on the side, maybe I have an Etsy and I'm making earrings, or I'm making scarves, or or I sort of have a little landscaping business that I'm doing in my neighborhood, whatever it might be, that's actually helping me have more rounded skills, which are more entrepreneurial, which give me a bit better sort of operational mindset for my business or whatever I'm doing in the company that I'm for my employer. And, it also makes me more independent and more sort of self-directed in helping develop my career, because it is quite complicated to have every single person in an organization, particularly big organizations with thousands of people, be managing their nonlinear careers. It's still evolving in terms of how companies are doing that and enabling talent mobility within the organization, because it hasn't been set up like that, having had these sort of linear, continuous, and vertically progressive careers within the organization. So a lot of things that are changing. And dealing with all these things at the same time. So having people be more entrepreneurial and feel more confident, be developing their skills, which they can bring those augmented skills, to benefit in the workplace. And the other piece of that is it may be whether your department or division or company is not well set up for talent mobility within the organization. And the stats, the data seems to prove that, because only 20% of people feel that they have support from their boss or employer about that their next career progression is going to be internal, which means that it's easier for someone to leave for them to take the next career step. So what I do think is having really open conversations as a leader with your team, because it may be that there may not be the place, or you need to have the relationships across departments or divisions to help somebody progress you've got to be willing to let them go into another department first. But helping somebody even leave your organization isn't necessarily a bad thing, because if they do leave and you've helped them because they can't progress in your department, particularly now that they're flatter, they're going to be an amazing ambassador for you. And they're going to go, oh my God, you should work for Sophie. She was fantastic. Go and work for that company. They're great. They'll help you develop you. Those are these, not thinking the kind of you leave this company, you're dead to us. It's a very, very different ways of thinking about work and leadership.
So I'm going to round us up. I've got a couple of questions. One is that question that maybe you might even kind of go, oh, blimey, that I get that a lot. But when somebody says empathy, Sophie, what top tips have you got for me? What have you got that say, look, think about this, bear that in mind, whatever it is that could help somebody?
So in my book, I try and set the stage, but then I really go into empathy tips, empathy, whether it's when you're remote working or as in empathy in sales or empathy as a leader. All of these in any interaction, any human interaction, whether it's virtual or in person, listening first. Listening, and then the best thing, because what you say, Guy, and what I hear are two different things. And sometimes we may be spot on in terms of me understanding exactly what you meant, but oftentimes I haven't necessarily quite understood. So me restating back to you, I listen hard, and then I restate back to you what you said. That automatically, first of all, says, I value what you say and I'm trying to understand. Big tick. And then it gives us a chance of actually understanding, did I hear you in terms of what you were trying to say? And therefore you can refine it, you can tweak it a bit. No, actually, no, what I meant was this. So then we have a much more productive conversation because we really understand each other. And then you do the same. And it also, in me doing that, it encourages you to do the same to me. Listen to me more actively, and then also be kind of go, well, is that what you meant? So just those two little things of listening hard and really then sort of restating it and giving the affirmations like, as you're going. So you're recognizing that establishes much more of a value-based, respectful communication where you're really actually understanding each other. And the outcomes automatically will be better. And in so doing, you build up a much more trust-based, when people feel valued and feel respected, trust builds, which then helps ease every further interaction, makes it easier and more empathetic. So those are some very basic things. But my book has a lot of different empathy habits in terms of what you can do to really, and then it sort of feeds off each other to have better interactions.
So I'm going to put the link in the information, but just say the name of your book again, Sophie, if you would do.
Empathy Works, the Key to Competitive Advantage in the New Era of Work.
And that's available on Amazon, I guess?
In bookshops in the US, the UK, and online, whatever your favorite online retailer is.
What else might people pay attention to that would help them?
Well, I do have a podcast called Transforming Work with Sophie Wade, and I'm interviewing people who from all different, like them. And I just interviewed somebody about digital nomadism because it's really interesting how that's evolving, and you have now families that are sort of moving together in communities, and it's. But it can be about flexibility on the shop floor. It can be about, remote working or content development and strategies in this. It's all about how to adapt for and navigate this period of change to craft whatever's right for the next way that's going to be most impactful for your business and each one of your employees. So it's supposed to be sort of helping people sort of understand what people are implementing that is succeeding. So that's good. I do a lot of writing and LinkedIn. I'm publishing stuff and sharing useful articles and on Twitter as well. So
that's perfect. Well, I'll put those links in. So listen, from me, from everybody listening, just thank you so much for your time. You've helped to bring some clarity and some succinctness to it, which I value and appreciate. So thank you for being on. Stay on for a few more minutes just to make sure everything works. But other than that, you've been a joy. So thank you so much, Sophie.
Thank you so much, Guy, for having me. It's been a great conversation, really digging into empathy. Thanks.
That's it. So I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please share so others get to hear about us, and subscribe so you keep up to date on new episodes. Also visit livingbrave.com if you want to connect with me and find out more about executive coaching, team effectiveness and changing culture. Oh, and of course you can buy my book Living Brave Leadership on Amazon. So on that note, see you soon.